Hello, everyone. Welcome to Decarbonization, Insights, Tools, and Strategies for Effective Sustainability, presented by Matthias Muehlbauer, founding partner of OnePointFive. This workshop is presented by Work on Climate in partnership with OnePointFive. My name is Valerie Vidala. I'm a volunteer at Work on Climate. My team member, Tanya Meshram, is helping with the technical support for the session, along with Laura Latorre and Denise Devlin from OnePointFive. This event will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel and website, and the slides will be shared after the event. I'm going to give you a quick review of today's format. Matthias will present for approximately 45 minutes, which will include an individual exercise, followed by a Q&A session where you can ask questions in the chat. For those of you who are new here, Work on Climate is a nonprofit organization with a mission to make climate work mainstream. With a community of 29,000 plus members, we regularly organize events like this to help professionals transition into climate-related careers. This event is sponsored by the Learn Workplace Climate Action Community of Practice, which is in the Work on Climate Slack community. The channel was recently created for members who want to share resources, ask questions, and have discussions about climate action and sustainability in the workplace. Since you're attending this particular event, we would love for you to join the channel and participate in the conversation. Our partner organization, OnePointFive, is dedicated to driving meaningful climate action by helping businesses navigate and address climate-related financial risks and opportunities. Their mission is to support companies in building sustainable strategies and staying ahead of evolving climate regulations. Matthias is the founding partner of OnePointFive. He has a decade of experience working across APAC in the United States in management consulting and entrepreneurship roles, and is a previous World Economic Forum contributor, writing on ESG investment and innovative climate technology solutions. We're thrilled to have you with us, Matthias, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I appreciate the introduction there. I do know that we had a slide here. Maybe I didn't turn the slide as you were sharing your introduction. So here's that slide. Here's another slide as well, which I think provides the actual Slack channel as well for those folks. We're going to be doing some Slido sort of interactive questions as well. So if you can just use your phone and use the QR code on the screen on the right-hand side, or go to slido.com and type in 3924214. And we'll have another slide that provides that in a second as well. So my name is Matthias. It's great to be here, founding partner of OnePointFive. My pronouns are he, him, his. I have various passions. The ones that I've decided to include on this slide here include nature-based solutions and rewilding, surfing, philosophical deep dives, and Wikipedia holes as well. So today we're going to go through decarbonization, including insights, tools, and strategies for effective sustainability. So as I mentioned, here's a second chance to get that QR code as well. Before we jump in, I'd just love to share that from our content side, we're coming from the OnePointFive Academy, which is an 8-week cohort-based program focused on net zero start to finish. To date, we've had about 700 graduates go through our program since launching in February last year. And for today, we've got a QR code here as well. I know that's a lot of QR codes, where you'll be able to apply to our upcoming cohort, apply by October 13th, which is coming up very, very soon, to get a 20% limited time discount for our Work on Climate friends. Just type in Work on Climate, or WOC decarb, and we'll find your application. Needs-based scholarships are available as well. So let's jump in again. QR code is at the ready here. Let's start off with a quick poll. Alrighty. Okay, which of these best describes where you are in your career journey? So you can join with the QR code on the left-hand side. Just love to get a sense of who's in the crowd at the moment. Okay, amazing. Okay, we have some unemployed, we have some employed, folk that are currently looking for their first job in sustainability. Amazing. We've got some freelance consultants in the sustainability space. Wonderful. You're going to love the deep dive into tools. People that are employed outside of sustainability and looking to transition in. Fantastic. Welcome, pivoters. I'm glad you're here. Amazing. And then we've got quite a few job seekers as well. Wonderful. Okay. And then a follow-up question here. What are you hoping to get out of the session today? From here, you can just type in your answers as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts from what you're looking for in this session. Hopefully, I can touch on a couple of those asks as well. Amazing. I'm just seeing this is loading in the background. We have 10 participants typing. Perfect. Yes, actions, tools to help influence C-suite. Keep up to date on clean tech. We'll have a little bit of carbon tech or carbon accounting tech in here today. Some insights on decarb techniques, finding customers. That's always a tricky one. Familiarization with the decarb tool, for sure. New knowledge. Well, hopefully that can be achieved today. Let's see. Networking as well. Perfect. And then hello for the folk that said hi in the chat. Hi, folk from Connecticut. London, I'm also in London today, actually. Hello there, Harshita. And hello from Seattle, Edinburgh.
No.
Amazing. Wonderful. Okay. All right, that sounds great. A lot of folk doing new knowledge, which is fantastic. Let's see how we go today. All right, so let's get started. So a brief background on who we are at OnePointFive. So I don't need to tell you folk on the call here, as you're quite savvy. It's getting quite hot in here. Currently, we're on a 4 degrees Celsius trajectory or warming pathway where future sustainable growth is at severe risk without proactive action to get us onto a 1.5 degrees Celsius trajectory as well. 1.5 as an organization, our vision is a planet free of all excess greenhouse gas emissions generated by human activity, safeguarding Earth for future and current generations as well. And so our advisory side of the business is really focused on these key challenges that we see. We believe the climate crisis can be solved by deploying the best of human ingenuity. We see our services align with capacity constraints for clients that are busy and have more work initiatives that their team can handle, for selecting solutions because there's so many out there to choose from, but they need always tailoring to their business as well. We help to identify and fill expertise gaps, especially when we're looking at training or in-house climate talent to get things done, and also tailoring to bespoke needs. Many of climate needs are very bespoke. They require interdisciplinary problem solving. And so we need a lot of different approaches to come to the table. Our approach that underlies this pedagogy that we're going to go through today is with this thing called the 1.5 pathway, which is a 5-step journey to decouple emissions from sustainable growth, starting from learning and committing and setting your net zero strategy, building your emissions sort of baseline around scope 1, 2, 3, around your emissions at the enterprise level, but also at your product level, understanding and reporting to the various regulatory frameworks that are out there. Then decarbonization of your initiatives to get you to net zero, and then exploring what are the other options beyond net zero that you can get involved in. So today's learning objectives around this focus around decarbonization, we're going to first describe what corporate decarb is and the leading decarbonization trends and drivers. We're going to discuss the various available decarb tools, including the marginal abatement curves and internal carbon pricing. We're going to then list some of the principles of investment into decarb, considering return on investment and environment, and then understand the current landscape of software platforms that can help corporations accelerate decarbonization. Does that sound good? Okay, I know everyone's on mute, so I'm gonna pretend like that was a resounding yes. Okay, let's jump into decarbonization trends and drivers as well. So what is decarbonization? Well, decarbonization is the strategic removal or reduction of human-made emissions, carbon emissions released into the atmosphere. Corporate decarbonization more specifically involves decreasing or eliminating carbon emissions from an organization's activities. And some key definitions that I might be mentioning in this discussion over the next hour or so: abatement, which relates to curbing emissions in order to reduce the concentration of certain gases and contaminants in our environment, and decarbonization here, which Often is about reducing carbon intensity, lowering the amount of gas emissions produced by combustion of fossil fuels, but can expand to other carbon dioxide equivalent emissions as well. So starting off with why we need to decarb and some of the benefits here. One, we see there's enhanced financial performance and cost savings. We see it can help improve your brand reputation, customer loyalty. It can help you get ahead of regulation. It can help you gain a competitive advantage in the market. It can create operational efficiencies, reduction in your company overheads. Let's go into some of these benefits in more detail. So on the topic of emission reductions and financial performance, we see enhanced cost savings through effective decarbonization. Here we see an example from McKinsey covering 4 distinct industries and the results from decarbonization that shows that simultaneous reduction of emissions and better performance is possible. We can see examples from industries like automotive, chemicals, logistics, and healthcare on the screen showing proportional cost and emission reductions up to 40%. The second benefit that we see in terms of dual benefits here, in another example of enhancing both financial performance and cost savings, we see that up to 20 to 40% abatement of carbon emissions is possible on average, while also reducing costs. And this example here is showing some interesting advanced industries, which have a lot of manufacturing involvement, right? And so this is likely involving looking at sustainable materials, sustainable production methods. And in areas like logistics, we see large reductions possible. And with the heavy reliance of transportation in the logistics sector, this is likely due to finding more efficient routes, shifting transportation from air freight to shipping where possible, and also electrification of fleets. Third, we see sustainable initiatives driving loyalty and business growth as well. And this is a huge benefit. We can see this in this retail and consumer research report from Capgemini, where 77% of organizations tie sustainability in consumer products to an increase in consumer loyalty, and 69% tie this to an increase in brand value. 63% of organizations tie this to an increase in total revenue as well. And then in terms of the third lever that we see here in terms of benefits, getting ahead of regulation, especially looking at the impacts when organizations do not. Companies impact regulation and reputation through a limited license to operation, as you can see in the first bar here, but also reputational damage based on perceived misuse of resources. This has a huge potential impact of up to 70% of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, which is one measure, for example, of an organization's profitability. This also impacts operating costs through raw materials, and this can potentially impact organizations up to 60% of EBITDA as well. On top of that, we can see production delay or cancellation due to lack of access. This is certainly something to consider when we look at climate risk, for example, and extreme weather that businesses need to protect against and build sort of resilient supply chains. For example, we see a 25% risk to your sort of 25% reduction in your EBITDA as well. And the fourth point here is that green premiums can boost profitability of carbon abatements and create competitive advantage in the market. Now, this chart here can be a little confusing, but this is taken from a marginal abatement cost curve. We're going to go into more detail on that later. What it does show is that integrating sustainability into your product development as well as your pricing through green premiums, for example, increasing your prices of more sustainable goods and services can create both a profitable and impactful reduction to carbon emissions. But it can also create competitive advantage in the market, and then you are able to reduce your emissions at the same time you are increasing your profits. Fast-moving players can capture the value of full decarb through value-based pricing strategies or earning a price premium on green goods and services. In some sectors, we're already seeing green premiums of 15 to 30%. And then finally, we are seeing that corporate sustainability investments are driving cost savings as well. There are a few examples here that I'd like to share from organizations like GE, Dow, and Walmart that show some exceptional results from decarb initiatives. In the first case, GE has saved $300 million by reducing gas emissions by 32% and water usage by 45% compared to a 2004 and 2006 baseline, respectively. Dow has saved 9.8 billion since 1994 from reducing wastewater consumption energy from manufacturing, investing just 2 billion into resource efficiency to do so. And Walmart's energy initiative over the past 10 years has reduced lighting energy consumption and reduced costs by more than 100 million. So now we know some of the benefits of corporate decarbonization. What is actually stopping us from getting there? Well, part of this is actually doing this work, which can be incredibly complex. But luckily, there's a lot of frameworks and tools that are out there that can help. So starting off with these steps of decarbonization, we can then roll in where the tools actually fit. So there's 3 distinct steps of decarbonization in corporates, which will highlight some of the main tools that are important in doing a lot of this work. Let's start with the first step here. So building a transition plan with climate targets. And so you can use leading frameworks like the Science Based Targets Initiative, Carbon Disclosure Project, Climate Transition Plan, and also the 1.5 Pathway. Part of this is really aligning stakeholders and goals. That's sort of step 1. Step 2, we need to baseline and analyze our environmental footprint and bring in both environmental and financial information as well. Through this, we can also understand the impact of various initiatives that we have, and we can then sequence these in some type of prioritization approach. We call this the MAC curve, or the Marginal Abatement Cost Curve. We can also start to pay for these by looking at things like internal carbon pricing, and I'll go through that as well. It's almost like building an internal kitty of investment dollars that can be then directed to decarbonization, right? And throughout this, we're always using financial and environmental models as well. And then finally, we're looking at how do we actually implement some of these decarbonization initiatives. And this is where we might look at carbon abatement and insetting solutions or carbon offset solutions as well. We're going to focus mainly on the MAC curve and carbon pricing in today's session. We're going to show a couple examples of some software tools that are really great in this space as well, that really bring in financial and environmental information into the same decision to enable decarbonization to go. And taking a step back a little bit. So what are we actually trying to decarbonize to? So this is the pathway to net zero when we take a look at the big picture from the private sector perspective, and it looks like this. In the early stages of decarbonization plans from 2020 to 2030, so you can see in the box, the first box on the left, the push is to reduce 45% of carbon emissions by 2030. Companies and organizations will be investing into the structuring of these climate plans and making progress through internal abatement of low-hanging fruit options and also funding offset markets. After 2030, action will likely phase out offsets as internal structures are well established and standards-aligned action through abatement eliminates much of the remaining emissions. And by 2050, the idea is that offsets will take a backseat to finishing climate commitments and achieving net zero throughout value chains as well. But even though I've mentioned offsets in these different timescales, it's important to start with achieving net zero through your value chain as well, especially as that's where your scope 3 emissions, the largest source of emissions, are needing to be decarbonized as soon as possible. When we're looking to plan your decarbonization approach, making this a reality internally is really complicated, with many inputs of different types of quantities needed to be balanced to figure out how and when are the best ways to enact reduction emissions. And this is what you might consider: time constraints, the justice implications, the cost, the reduction potential, right? And many more, which I've listed on the screen here. So actually having one tool to be able to visualize all or many of these aspects will be great for decision makers who may not have the time to dive deep into the quantitative analysis. The Marginal Abatement Cost Curve, or the MAC curve, is a solution to fit that complex problem. And as we'll see on the next slide, they definitely appear to have a lot of moving parts. Don't worry, I'm going to walk through the different parts of these fairly simply. The curve attempts to cut through all the necessary inputs to display abatement potential and abatement costs for each possible reduction initiative. It also presents the full slate of reduction initiatives collectively to show the potential of using every lever that an organization has for decarbonization. So let's jump in. All right, so this is what a marginal abatement cost curve, sometimes it's called the MAC, but you can also call it the Marginal Abatement Cost Curve if you like a bit of a tongue twister. So decarb and planning how to make this a reality is pretty tough, as I mentioned. But this is a graph that presents abatement potential and abatement cost across each possible initiative that an organization could pursue individually and collectively. It's used to identify and sequence or prioritize the financial investment underlying different decarb solutions and to compare their carbon impacts and costs quickly. Let's go through this in more detail. Right, so as we mentioned, the curve helps to strategically sequence the implementation of decarb initiatives based on the highest abating potential and cost of implementation in a given year. And so you can take a look at the breakdown here and walk through each of the areas. Each block represents the abatement quantity potential and cost of each analyzed solution. Profitable solutions can be deployed now or on the left-hand side. The high cost and low potential solutions are on the right-hand side as well. So in this example here, what we're looking at, the types of colors correspond to the different decarbonization opportunities within the materials of this automotive company here. So this is from the European automotive sector. So we have materials such as steel, aluminium, batteries, rubber, right? And these are all different shades of blue and sort of purple as well. So these are low carbon alternative car materials or components that can be invested in. Let's take a look at the axes. All right, so on the y-axis, as we go up, above zero, we see abatement solutions increase in cost. We see the cost of solutions become cost savings below zero. The lower the bar, the more profitable the solution. The higher the bar, the more costly the solution, right? So that's the y-axis here. And on the bottom, we have the abatement potential or the x-axis. And so as we go from left to right on the x-axis, we actually see the abatement potential. For example, how much a solution can reduce carbon dioxide, increase in decrease. The narrower the bar, the less effective the solution. The wider the bar, the more effective the solution. All right, I'll let that sink in for a second. And the reason why is we have a quick poll. All right, so back to Slido. Hopefully it's still up on your computer or your phone. Let's hear from you all. What does the x-axis represent on the MAC curve? I don't have any waiting music in the background, so I just have to pretend like we're hearing some lovely elevator music in the background, maybe a ticking sound as well. What are people's thoughts on what the x-axis represents on the MAC curve? Alrighty, not seeing any action on screen here. That's okay. Let's assume that you selected the answer, abatement potential. Well done. You've done really well. The answer is the x-axis represents the abatement potential of decarbonization initiatives. Sorry, my slides are a bit cut off here, but it's described by the x-axis on a MAC curve. All right, so when we're putting together a MAC curve, there's a step-by-step iterative guide. Let's walk through each of these 4 steps so you understand a high-level view of how this process works. And then we're going to deep dive into each step in a bit more detail. All right, so step 1, this is our information gathering phase. We need to gather and assess information about carbon abating initiatives to build out this curve. And then we move on to step 2, and we calculate the MAC curve, mapping out impact of each initiative against cost. And note here that we are calculating the MAC curve at a point in time using available information we have. I'm going to show you where to get that information in a second. As we're calculating this manually, this is the approach we're using. But you can imagine that if you were to use software for calculating, you may be able to automate updating this information to provide an up-to-date snapshot. For step number 3, we begin to operationalize these decarb initiatives. And this means setting up projects for them to be executed by various relevant teams. For example, operationalizing a project on electrifying a delivery fleet. That would involve perhaps the supply chain team, the procurement team, and the finance team. For step 4, we then make the abatement curve more cost-effective through additional sustainability efforts. This is referring to the increasing economies of scale that are available. Some of the earlier investments in initiatives will make parts of the abatement curve more cost-effective because they set the foundation. For example, you've already invested in developing a new form of green steel to use in manufacturing. fantastic. And this becomes cheaper the more that you use it, and are able to procure larger volumes of materials to produce this. And so your costs come down. Finally, a note, which is highlighted in the orange. This is an iterative process. So that's why you see this arrow coming from step 4 back to step 1. We need to start at step 1 again after having implemented the 4 steps, after you began to execute on some of these sustainability initiatives and understand what that new context is. Okay, so looking back to the step 1 here, back to the MAC curve. So from the value chain, we need to then understand from our value chain stakeholders and key personnel from your finance department, we can then calculate the size and shape of each rectangle, which will allow us to isolate each initiative's total financial and also environmental impact by calculating reduction potential and cost. And remember, each box represents a specific carbon reduction initiative that could be undertaken. We'll be going through this. Well, you'll actually see how some of the information comes to life as well on the next slide. So when you are gathering and assessing information, I know there's quite a bit of information on this slide, but just remember them in these 4 different buckets: project lifetime, the costs of projects, the financial benefits, and the abated or predicted abated greenhouse gas emissions. So in each of these categories, we can get even more granular as well. And some of these terms will be a little sort of financial. So if you have Investopedia open in a tab in the background, that might help if you're unsure. So project lifetime, the first bucket. Organizations need to analyze the infrastructure that surrounds and supports each initiative and what the financing of each aspect will require. The costs of a project, the second bucket, can be broken down into an analysis of financing, which can be either debt or equity, or your upfront capital costs, your cost of finance, which is how expensive your debt or equity is, your ongoing operational costs, and your discount rate as well. Your financial benefits, the third bucket, can come from a range of different sources, like operational cost savings, how much you're saving from switching from solar on your project, or revenue from new initiatives that may include the creation of new products and services. We can also include your asset salvage value here too, which is the amount you get at the end of the project when you sell your asset. And then from each of these initiatives, we'll have your abated or predicted abated greenhouse gas emissions as well. And typically, you're going to understand these abated GHG emissions from things like, what is the consumption that's changing? For example, you're using less fuel when you electrify your vehicle fleet. Are there process improvements and changes? Have you shifted your air freight to shipping freight, for example, and that has improved your process? That's also reducing emissions as well. All right, so now that you've gathered all those bits of information, let's jump into calculating the curve. So from here, we then need to evaluate each of the investments into each initiative to determine this as well. So now we can go into this step 2B, which is creating the abatement cost curve. So this is where we need to then collate all the different initiatives that we have as we've now calculated the marginal abatement cost of each project. Imagine this would be various initiatives like electrifying fleet, swapping out inefficient light bulbs for energy saving. We're also switching 50% of shipping, for example. We then build a table with these cumulative abatement calculations, and you can do this in Excel, or you can do this through a platform as well. And so this is what this might look like. And then from there, you can then operationalize these abatement efforts. So take the largest carbon impact initiatives. They should be planned and begun as early as possible. And then initiatives with a negative abatement cost can be pursued with an expected financial benefit, which can enable larger changes in later decarb stages as well. And so with this is a set of best practices that you should consider. Prioritize projects with the highest carbon abatement potential first. Don't just prioritize cost saving and revenue generation. Use the curve to choose the projects based on lowest costs over time, rather than only considering upfront investments. And then also take into account any negative and positive ecological and social impacts. So that looks like a really long process. There are quite a few of these organizations that help with this decarbonization approach. Here's a couple examples here. And taking Sinai Technologies, for example, they're a platform based out of San Francisco. We're going to take you through a quick case study and what this looks like in practice. So this is from an example shared at a recent webinar we did with a team at Sinai. They're working with a client in the automotive industry. Sine's customer, they were a large automotive company, wanted to understand the environmental and financial impacts of planned decarb projects for their manufacturing. By connecting these projects to their greenhouse gas inventory and then modeling specific project costs, the expected abatement and financial returns were understood, which then influenced project no-go or goes decisions and defined ideal project implementation timelines. So this is what it looked like. They had a mitigation library of different decarb options that they could select. And this also includes things like industry averages for carbon abatement, financing, and timing. Then they were then able to identify things like government subsidies as well that might exist for decarbonizing, solar, for example, as a solution, and potential subsidies that are provided by the Inflation Reduction Act. This also provides the option to modify data inputs as well. On top of that, you can then establish these mitigation roadmaps, constructing this MAC curve that we mentioned before, taking into account various financial KPIs and metrics that might be interesting for the finance team to make these decisions as well. And then from there, we get this set of decarbonization targets and scenarios that we're able to put in, taking into account pricing and budgets as well. Here's an example on screen of what that might look like here, taking into account this automotive company. And then from there, you can then link the MAC curve to net zero pathways. What are the projects that we need to get to based on the mitigation that we're predicting in order to reach this trajectory of net zero by your interim goal of 2030 and then 2050 as well. All right, so we're going to do a quick tool. This is slightly adjacent, but it's also going to help with finding trade-offs between different options of decarbonization. So we're going to do a quick carbon removal portfolio using this tool, the Road to 10 gigatons. And I've done this many times. My answer is always different, but I think it's a great exercise when thinking and getting the mindset of how do you actually prioritize and sequence the different carbon reduction solutions that are out there as well. So with that, we're going to give 5 minutes or so to work on this individually. The instructions are to open the link that's dropped in the chat by Denise. A portfolio will come up online, and then you're able to then move the different bars as you would like. And essentially, you're trying to get to 10 gigatons of removal by the end of it. Cool. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. If you finish early, feel free to drop a screenshot if you're brave enough into the Zoom chat. And we can take a look at the different responses as well. Okay, so I've got 5 minutes on the clock, and we will resume after that.
All you children gather round, we will dance and we will whirl. All you children gather round, we will dance together. All you children gather round, we will dance and we will whirl. We will dance to our own song, we must spin to our own world. Won't you dance with me? Stop your crying, dance with me. Feel the rhythm of my arms, don't let's cry now, dance with me. Stop your tearing up, don't you hear the music? Don't you feel the happy beat? Bring your paddle, dance with me. We will dance to our own song and whirl around. All you children gather round, we will dance together. All you children gather round, we will dance together.
Amazing. Yeah, perfect. Anyone brave enough to share what they did in the chat? Well done, David Ishtar. Great stuff. Okay, I think Ishtar, if you can just drop the screenshot in, that'd be amazing. I think I just see the link to the website again. Yeah, well done. Denise, we should have thought of prizes. Okay, trying. Okay. I got you. No images available. Oh, that's a shame.
Let me see if I can
Okay.
fix something.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we can just have a quick, just make sure you share reasonable images, gang.
Actually, it's the privacy in the computer. It's nothing to do with your side of the permission that I'm trying to face.
Got you. Okay,
Yeah.
no
trying,
worries at all. No worries at all.
I'm trying.
That's okay.
I can tell you my numbers if that works.
Yeah, sure. What did you get at the bottom in terms of the different? It's okay. What was your level of like permanence at the bottom? Maybe that's a good thing to add in.
It shows medium permanence.
Medium permanence. Okay, so you went sort of a combination of direct, sort of like engineered removal and then also nature-based solutions.
So I tried everything, whatever the maximum warning was telling me not to go to, and whenever I hit 10 billion, like 10 gigawatts, that was my solution to the problem.
Yeah. No, the answer is definitely surprising. Medium permanence as well. Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely hard.
But yeah, the point is like it's costing a lot of money where the difficulty is, right?
Right, exactly. So new removal solutions are very expensive based on a carbon
I actually
dioxide
just
per
learned
ton.
this from your chat the other day because you were presenting on NBS. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got scale 13.1 billion gigatons, cost 2.1 trillion. So eye-watering number, isn't it? 68 million hectares, 30 exajoules used, 31 exajoules performance. Yeah, medium permanence. Yeah, wow. Alrighty, we have about 14 seconds left. Why don't you just put in the cost of your carbon solution, portfolio solution in the chat? Maybe that's a good measure for everybody. 468 billion. Oh my God. Well done. Amazing. All right, that is the end of the timer, by the way, not the heralding of the king. Let's jump into the next part of the presentation. But 1.4 trillion seems to be a pretty big number. 506 billion. Wow, Kurt, you're doing something well there. 943 billion. There we go. Someone achieved high permanence. That's fantastic. Jeez, 2.2 trillion. All right, well, if anyone has a spare 2.2 trillion, it seems like we can solve climate, so that's great. Just let us know in the chat if that's you. All right, let's move on. All right, so this is a great then way to think about, there are so many different solutions. These are just carbon solutions that we have highlighted in this tool, but we are able to then prioritize, and it's essentially a bunch of trade-offs that we can make. And so that's the connection here from that tool that I think is quite fun to play around with. You can go back and then try to see what happens when you do nature-based solutions, what happens when you do pure engineered removal, for example. All right. So you might be thinking, like, how do you actually fund some of these decarbonization activities that we saw in the chat here? It was 1.4 trillion. One way that corporates can actually do this is one, quantifying both the environmental and the financial benefit that's often then critical to drive corporate decarbonization. And actually, when we look at C-suite executives, they're actually unsure where to trade off short-term financial performance to achieve their long-term goals as well. Right. So one way to do this is through your carbon pricing, right? And there's two types of carbon pricing. External carbon pricing, this comes from ones that are set by governments or other regulatory bodies, usually to incentivize emitters to reduce their emissions through an economic signal. And then we also have internal carbon pricing, and that's where we're going to focus for the remaining part of this discussion. And actually, when we look at internal carbon pricing, it's actually becoming more prevalent. So there's an 80% increase in the number of companies using or planning to use internal carbon pricing, or ICP, in just 5 years, which is really, really cool. And this comes from CDP data as well. So there's a couple different ways that we can price carbon internally, right? So I'm going to go through each of these different areas and then go through where the potential is for greatest climate impact. Okay, so starting off from the bottom here, we can have a implicit carbon price, right? This might be an organization that is early on their journey of going on carbon pricing. And this actually embeds carbon price in calculations retroactively. So you've already done this activity from a business perspective. You're then retroactively assessing the impact of this low carbon action and then creating a benchmark for what they call a shadow price or internal fee. The second one is embedding a carbon price in calculations for forward-looking things like potential investments or climate risk analysis as well, but does not actually result in actual financial flows or monetary transfers. This might be the same thing as paper trading in the stock market, for example. You're just trying to assess the opportunity and risk and trying to build in that infrastructure into your organization. And then the final one is internal fee, and this charges business units directly to steer operational business decisions with the possibility of then using this kitty of money to direct towards a low carbon action fund. And so based on the level of impact versus least, the internal fee approach has the strongest influence to creating impact, as this affects financial flows within the company, provides revenue for lower carbon investments through collected fees. And as you go down, you see the influence weakening as well. One is used to inform business decisions, and the implicit carbon price just provides information to set an adequate shadow price or internal fee. And if you're a corporation looking to find what that initial benchmark of pricing, you might want to look at what the different benchmarks are out there. And so this is from a great Patch and Workday report that came out just a few weeks ago around carbon credit markets and how to set the price. And so this is showing the different external benchmarks that you could actually set your price to, which includes one, the social cost of carbon, which is the blue, the darker blue, and then the carbon cost of 1.5 degrees by 2030. And so you can use these prices as a starting place for this internal cost of carbon and gradually increase the cost as your measure of impact and quality increases. And as you can see at the various prices on screen here, you can use these as potential comparables to your own cost of carbon, or you can undertake more modeling on this exercise based on your own business and context. And that's what Workday did. And this is in the Patch report that I was talking about before. So Workday, which is a SaaS organization, have set an ICP by benchmarking two available external scientific estimates on the social cost of carbon. That's what we saw on the previous slide. To allocate their internal carbon price, they allocate costs to the cost centers based on their emissions, right? So they're recording their emissions for different cost centers, such as data centers and offices. And then based on that, they're able to then figure out what kind of funds they have to procure things like renewable energy certificates and finance carbon credits across offices, and also undertake decarbonization initiatives. And as they get better at this approach, they're then going to increase this internal carbon price to maintain their quality and impact objectives, right? And so the key recommendations here when you're thinking about this is, one, you should identify the mechanism, the cost center, the business activity to the emission activity. Two, you should use the relevant available benchmark for social cost of carbon, or work backwards from your own 1.5 degree emissions pathway. And then finally, you should continue to revise your ICP upwards to align with your quality and impact objectives, as well as your ambition. And just to leave you with some interesting sort of differences here, that top performing finance functions that really embed both environmental and financial decision-making into sustainability. You can see here the numbers represent an overperformance of these organizations relative to their peers based on percentage points. So you can see that measuring and disclosing emissions gives you like 17% higher if you are recording your scope 1 emissions, 17 again if you're scope 2 emissions. If you're doing scope 3 emissions, you're 21% better. Managing emissions around your value chain, you can see, has percentage points like 21, 20, and 14 as well. We also see embedding sustainability in capital investment decisions here on the right-hand side, 21, 17, and 14% as well. Right, and so we can see that focusing investment into areas like value chain creates great differentiation from your peers as well. All right, so let's just quickly finalize and wrap up this rapid fire 1 hour session that we have and get into some Q&A. So what we talked about today, some decarbonization drivers around financial performance, brand reputation, regulatory compliance, and operational efficiencies, which can be important drivers of corporate sustainability action. Essentially, why do you want to do this for these different areas of rationale? Then we showcase some essential decarbonization tools like marginal abatement cost curves, which can be an important way to strategically prioritize your different sustainability initiatives because you can't do everything under the sun. And this helps to manage costs and mitigation impact over time. We looked at how do you actually fund these initiatives using an internal carbon price. And Workday was a great example on how they're doing that as well. And then finally, we looked at some technology enablers. So we looked at Cyanide Technologies, and a range of different software solutions out there that you can go deeper into afterwards that allows for more tailored solutions across industries. All right, thank you so much. This came from our OnePointFive Academy and our team at OnePointFive. It was really lovely to share some of our insights around decarbonization. Again, we're doing our next cohort 6, starting at the end of October. But you have the ability to apply with a sweet discount of 20% if you mention work on climate, WC, decarb in your application. Of course, needs-based scholarships are certainly available as well. Alrighty, let's try this Slido again for a Q&A function. If you can just add your questions here on this, I will then stop sharing and perhaps take a look at the Q&A as well. Hold on 1 second. Denise, are you able to send me the link in the background? No worries. Thanks so much, Kathy. Okay, perfect. Alrighty, so I'm just going to take a look at the different questions that are available. Okay, let's take a look. So the first question that I'm seeing, okay. On the MAC curve, I'm not sure I'm following why there are more bars than categories that are listed on the far right. Can you help explain what each of the bars are? Yeah, let's take a look at, I'll just share my screen again and we get to the MAC curve. Give me 1 moment.
Matthias, you kind of got to it later on. I think they were different strategies, right? So like if there's approach versus another, totally. But it falls in the category.
Totally. Yeah. But I think that's the devil's in the detail, right? Like that's how that's the creativity of this, for example. So you might be a European automotive company like it was in that situation. And you're like, okay, how do we actually fundamentally reduce the emissions from the steel or aluminium that we're using within our production of cars? Right, and actually one approach could be looking at lower quality aluminium, for example, within safety bounds and using that as a replacement to your existing cars. That's one approach that you could look at. And of course, it's a trade-off process as well. You need to bring in a lot of different stakeholders to make sure, does this make sense from a quality perspective? Can we still sell the same car? That's one example. You could also look at green steel, for example, and this could be, how do you then get the steel that's being used to make the car? How do you get that from a source of production that is a lot more sustainable, right? And then you're able to then juggle the different priorities, right? And then bundle up that in a strategy and then pitch that to the key stakeholders that you need to, the ones with the budgets, perhaps the ones with executive control as well, like the CEO, the CFO, for example.
Do you mind if I ask a quick follow-on question then, based off of that answer? Like, how do companies come up even then with what their strategies are? How do you coach them on how to think creatively? Because sometimes they might be so locked in on their current business practices, they're not even thinking about alternative ways to decarbonize.
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe a quick way that I can explain maybe an approach that can work is taking into account a few different exercises we use in like a workshop, right? So you take the executives out of their day-to-day and then you put them into a workshop, and the workshop highlights things like yeah, McKinsey might do it for what, like $1 trillion a month or something. If you don't have $1 trillion a month, so you might then take the executives into a workshop. And the first thing you might want to do is, hey, what is your like your classic MBA strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? And your strengths might be we're fantastic in manufacturing and innovating in materials, for example, right? Your weaknesses might be, hey, we're a little bit slow and we're a laggard in the actual, industry that we're in, right? That might be a weakness. Opportunity might be, CBAM sort of regulations that are coming up, which gives us a chance to innovate. So CBAM is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is the EU tariff program that's coming out now, and I guess being fully operational in 2026. This actually just puts a tariff on various materials like steel, aluminium, and a few different areas as well. And so if they're selling into the EU, for example, they're then having to buy a bunch of CBAM certificates to the value of how much embodied carbon, how much carbon is within your materials that you're selling into that market, right? So that might be a threat, or it could be an opportunity as well. So you might do that. Then you might go through something like a materiality assessment, right? And you look at what is the importance to your company, and then what is the importance to your key stakeholders. And that's where you then put all these different initiatives, right? And that could be like, we care about sustainable products and getting a green premium. That might be the top one, for example. Or we care about managing our cost base based on sustainable initiatives. Or we care about being a leader in, I don't know, regulatory compliance or whatever it is. And this is a way then you can kind of converge all these different opinions based on the company context. And then from there, you can then prioritize, rank order, and then put that implementation plan into place, right? And that then brings in the phasing. How much budget do we have? When do we need to do this? What's the most priority thing, the least priority thing? And that's an approach that we've seen work in practice as well. Hope that helps. Thanks so much. Alrighty. Okay, so then the next question that I am seeing. Cool. What about measuring the actual impact? You talked about putting forward projects with proposed benefits, but important to track the results of the projects as well. Yeah, that's a great question. So in order to plan these initiatives, we have already done some level of impact assessment, right? So by impact here, we can talk about impact from an environmental perspective, and specifically it could be emissions, right? So before we've set up our initiatives, we've understood how much does it cost, right, over time, and then what is the potential reduction in emissions, right? And so let's say we're shifting from a fossil fuel energy source, we're then installing something like solar panels on our facilities. There's going to be a delta between the emissions that you're consuming with your fossil fuel energy source and the emissions you're consuming with your solar panel approach, right? And that delta, that difference, is actually the amount of avoided emissions, essentially. That is the impact part of that initiative. And so you can then go, okay, we've got that initiative here. What about when we electrify our fleets? Well, then you have your automotive cars that you're using on fossil fuels, and then you've got your electric vehicles, right? And there'll be some reduction opportunities there too, or avoided emissions opportunities here as well. Obviously, a bunch of inputs are required, like what grid are you plugging in your EV into? How many miles are being driven by your fleet of cars that you have in your company, etc. But you can figure out and model out these differences and then put that impact quantification into your marginal abatement cost curve as well. So hopefully that answers that question there as well. All right, let's move on. I know we have about 6 minutes left. Love to get to more questions. Alrighty. Okay, the next question that I have. Okay. All right, so I think these ones are tied. So let me just quickly read these questions here. Okay. Okay, there's a question here about the internal carbon price. So I might just answer that because I spent a little less time on that and more time on the MAC curve. Okay, so it's a great question. The question is, why do we use the internal carbon price? Can't we just refer to the price of carbon credits? Yeah, so an internal carbon price, you have the ability to choose your own price, right? To value the emissions that your organization is emitting. Putting a price to it allows you to then create this quantity times price situation, which can then create your fund of investment dollars that can then be put into various initiatives, right? And so you can use the price of carbon credits. The question is, which type of carbon credit market do you want to map that to? Which region? What's the context? How do you manage, manage the context of those different carbon markets with your own business? But you also know that the carbon credit market at the moment is severely under what I showed on screen, which is the social cost of carbon that I'd showed on screen. So the White House has something like $50 per ton of CO2. But you can see that, you know, the price of, I don't know, the 2006 solar credit, solar renewable energy credits in India, roughly about 13 cents, right? And so you need to be able to match the, I guess, internal carbon price to relevant comparables, right? On top of that, you might want to be ambitious with your sustainability strategy and your initiatives, and you might actually have a more, I guess, a higher internal carbon price that you set, right? And that's maybe because you believe we need to do this really quickly. We want to make sure that our business is accountable, right? And so you actually might elect to choose a higher price, an internal carbon price as well, right? So I think the question here is, what is the context of your company? What is your strategy? And what are the relevant comparables to select your internal carbon price from? Hopefully that answers your question. Amazing. We've got 3 minutes. Let me try find another question. Ooh, there's a question actually that might be kind of interesting. Are you hearing about corporate gamification solutions that make abatement more fun to pursue? So quickly, no, there's maybe En-ROADS is a great tool, I think, that's out there. I think it's a little bit more academic. The Road to 10 Gigatons tool is very cool. I think it's built by a few computer scientists in undergrad. I think that's pretty cool. I certainly think there's some opportunities there for sure, but I haven't seen many fun ones out there. Thank you so much. All right, let's see what else I can answer. Okay. Does the position on the x-axis of a MAC curve have significance, or is it just the width of the bar that holds weight? Yeah. Let me show you what that is referring to. One moment. Okay, let me just find the MAC curve. Okay, so there was this slide that I showed before. Okay, so just going back to the question, just so everyone is referring to the right information. So the question is, does the position on the x-axis, right? So it's the horizontal axis of a MAC curve have significance, or is it just the width of the bar that holds the weight? Right, so the width of the bar shows the abatement potential, right? But the abatement cost is the height, right? So the more costly activities are the ones that are above zero on the right-hand side. We can see one that's around, close to 800 sort of dollars per metric ton of CO2 if you were to take that initiative, right? It's the one right on the end. And so there's a super high cost, but also low potential solution. The reason why it's low potential is because the width is really, really skinny, right? And so the MAC curve approach is actually, you're prioritizing by sorting all these different initiatives based on their sort of heights as well, right? So you're doing it based on first how profitable these solutions are if they're below zero, right? So these are maybe like energy efficiency initiatives, for example. They're ones that we actually are going to get cost savings on an annual basis, and therefore that's great. We have more money cash flow wise to invest in future initiatives as well. And then at the same time, maybe the R&D on the far right-hand side, maybe the R&D based on economies of scale, that stuff gets cheaper. You know, like solar panels got super, super cheap. Batteries have reduced in cost by 50% in the last year, for example. And now we've got this kitty of money because of these annual cost savings, for example, and we can then invest in something like that. So I mentioned that the MAC curve gets updated based on the context. That's true. So you need to update these initiatives as well. And that's where software tools that can bring in this information are really, really handy. So you can make more up to date and real-time decisions as well. Okay, amazing. So thank you so much. I'm going to wrap things up today as well. Really appreciate everyone that joined. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing for this one and then just quickly finalize with some messages. Hold on one moment. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, so final messages apply by October 13th with the Work on Climate Decarb sort of discount code for a 20% limited time discount. And also join this channel here. Please join this channel. Learn workplace climate action from Work on Climate. They're doing some fantastic, fantastic work at Work on Climate. We always love partnering with this fantastic community. And of course, if you hated it, let us know. If you loved this last hour, I hope so, let them know as well. And that helps us get better at what we do as well. But otherwise, have a fantastic rest of the day and good luck decarbonizing.
Thank you so much for that, Matthias. That was fantastic. Thank you so much to the team at OnePointFive. Please leave your feedback using this QR code. We'd love to know what you think about our sessions, and we look forward to having you join us for future sessions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.